Hey guys, this is the MMA breakdown with my predictions for UFC Fight Night 59, McGregor versus Siver. Not super excited for this card. I do think at least the main card is a little bit better than what we're used to with these free Fight Night cards, either on Fox Sports 1 or Fight Pass. But the preliminary card looks very weak. I think Eddie Alvarez falling out and Donald Cerrone stepping in as his replacement to fight Ben Henderson. I think that gives a boost to this card, although I don't see that being very competitive because of the quick turnaround for Cerrone after a very active year. And the main event, I'm really only interested in it because of Conor McGregor. I want to see him continue his rise, but I don't see that being one bit competitive. So, not that strong of a card, I think. Just kind of acceptable, just okay. But let's get right into the predictions. Starting off with the Fight Pass preliminary card at flyweight, Tateki Matsuda versus Joby Sanchez. Tateki Matsuda, coming off of his debut loss to Chris Beal. I actually thought he looked pretty good in that fight. I thought he was outstriking Beal. Showed a good jab. It's kind of frustrating Beal on the feet, but lost some key takedowns and didn't seem to be as good of an athlete as Beal. Lost the decision there, but I was kind of impressed with his jab. Seemed to have decent technical striking. And Joby Sanchez fought Wilson Heist in his debut. Lost the fight by decision. Got his back taken early standing. Had to fight off the rear naked choke. Did well to not get finished. Landed a big head kick, I believe, in the third round that dropped Heist. Couldn't finish him off. But other than that, didn't really do much else to convince me that he's a UFC level talent. Just got controlled and out-grappled by Heist for the majority of the fight. So I'm going to go with Matsuda here just because he showed me a little something more in his last fight with his striking. And Sanchez, I really didn't see anything impressive there. So two guys, we definitely haven't seen much of them in the UFC, but I'm going to go with Matsuda just based off what we saw in both of these guys' debuts. Next up at light heavyweight, Matt Van Buren versus Sean O'Connell. Matt Van Buren, finalist from Tough 19, got knocked out by Corey Anderson in the finale. In the house, he had a very unimpressive fight against Chris Fields, who seemed to be a very low-level opponent, and it was a very uneventful fight. Kind of wrote off Van Buren at that point, but in his next fight against Dan Spahn, who seemed to be a much more credible opponent, had to overcome some adversity in that fight. I think he got rocked himself, but ended up getting the knockout over Dan Spahn. But then in the finale, just got completely ran over very quickly in the first round by Corey Anderson. So I don't think Van Buren really has the athleticism or the technical skill to hang in the UFC. Sean O'Connell, coming off of his debut fight against Gian Villante, and I thought he looked decent there. I thought he outstruck Villante, came forward, landed a high volume of strikes, but ended up losing the decision. So if O'Connell can press the action, I could see him just having the more effective kickboxing game here. Van Buren might have the power edge, but I think this is pretty close. Neither of these guys really strike me as solid UFC mainstays, so I'm gonna go with Sean O'Connell, but I think it could go either way. Moving on to the Fox Sports 1 preliminary card at featherweight, Charles Rosa versus Sean Soriano. Charles Rosa, coming off of his debut loss to Dennis Siver, actually competed very well. Got taken down a lot, but was able to get several reversals on the ground, was able to get in top position for a little bit. Couldn't do much with it. I don't remember a whole lot about his striking, what happened on the feet. He did almost get finished at one point with an arm triangle, but I think I wouldn't put too much stock into him just for that performance. I think Siver is really overrated, and I'll get much more in depth with that when we get to the main event. I think he just kind of took advantage of a fading declining Dennis Siver. I don't know, but Sean Soriano has had 2 fights in the UFC in his debut, lost to Tatsuya Kawajiri. Was doing very well on the feet, seemed to be very aggressive through a high volume of strikes. Had Kawajiri in some trouble on the feet. Was defending the takedowns well early, but once Kawajiri secured the takedown, it was over from there. Soriano just looked like a fish out of water on the ground, and Kawajiri subbed him out quickly with the rear naked choke. And then his next fight against Chaz Skelly, again, was strong on the feet, but Skelly was able to just take him down repeatedly over and over. Soriano was able to get back up. But that was also, Skelly took that fight on very short notice. It was like a 1 or 2 week turnaround for him. And it showed in that fight he was really gassed, but still was able to impose his wrestling game on Soriano pretty effectively and easily. So I think Soriano really struggles with the ground game. I don't know how good Rosa's takedowns are. I don't think he took down Siver once in that fight. I think the only times he got on top were from reversals when he was on his back. This is another one. I think it's a bit of a toss-up. I'm going to go with Rosa. I just don't see Soriano being able to be good enough on the ground. But, if Rosa's not a great wrestler, can't get Soriano down early, I could definitely see Soriano, winning on the feet. Another kind of toss-up fight, but real close, but I'll go with Rosa. Next up at lightweight, Johnny Case versus Frankie Perez. Johnny Case, probably the only guy on this preliminary card that, the only prospect here that I'm really excited to see again. Had a very impressive debut showing against Kazuki Tokudome. Trains out of Alliance, and it showed in his striking. He seemed to be a very patient, technical striker. Really waited for his opportunity, clipped Tokudome, hurt him, and then finished him off with a guillotine choke against the fence. Tokudome certainly had not been an impressive fighter up to that point in the UFC, but no one had finished him up to that point. So strong showing for Case. And Frankie Perez, I don't know anything about him. Guy making his debut. So I just can't make a pick here, not knowing anything about Perez, but I do think Johnny Case seems like a strong, impressive young talent. So I would hope that he can, look good here, but I can't make a pick. So moving on, flyweight fight, Patrick Holohan versus Shane Howell. Patrick Holohan really impressed me in his debut win against Josh Sampo. That was on the doubling card. Clipped him with a big uppercut early, finished him off with a rear naked choke. And then his next fight against Chris Kalades, really kind of had the technical, the gaps in his fundamentals exposed. On the feet, Kalades had an easy time closing the distance, despite Holohan's length and unorthodox footwork and movement. And then on the ground, there were some good scrambles, but ultimately Kalades was able to get on top, maintain top control. Shane Howell looked pretty bad in his loss to Ray Borg, who does look like a good fighter, but I think Borg landed one punch and then took him down and submitted him with the rear naked choke very quickly. So I'm going to take Holohan here. If Howell, has a hole with the ground game, I think Holohan can easily expose that. And then on the feet, while he may not have solid fundamental striking, that unorthodox footwork and movement that we see from a lot of the Irish fighters, like Gunnar Nelson, McGregor, even Aisling Daly from Tough, that seems to work well for Holohan, and Howell just looked like a very low-level opponent against Ray Borg. So I'm going to take Holohan to win this. I think he can submit Howell. Next up at lightweight, Zhang Lipeng versus Chris Wade. A quick note about some of these Chinese fighters from Tough China. A quick point I want to make here. A lot of people have just completely written these fighters off, and I didn't watch Tough China, so I can't comment on how they looked. But that last Macau card, actually the Tough China finale card, everyone that I heard, give analysis on these guys, they just completely wrote them off, saying that the Chinese circuit, they face really weak competition compared to American fighters or even fighters from other nations like Brazil, and they certainly didn't look good there in the Tough China finale. And I'm mainly talking about Zhang Lipeng and Wang Sai, the two finalists there. But on the last Macau card, where they made their subsequent fights, both these guys looked vastly improved. And I admit that on the Tough China finale card, they looked like very green, very low-level fighters. But on that Macau card, Lipeng fought tough contestant Brendan O'Reilly from Tough Nations, and everyone I heard was picking O'Reilly, saying that Lipeng, again, that hadn't faced strong competition, and they just would refuse to give these Chinese fighters any credit against fighters from the other part of the world, just based on their nationality. And same thing with Wang Sai and Danny Mitchell. And it turned out that Wang Sai looked very good in that fight, completely wrecked Danny Mitchell. It was complete domination. Really kind of embarrassing performances for Mitchell and O'Reilly. And even a guy like O'Reilly, who's just a washout from Tough, I was really surprised people were picking him over Zhang Lipeng. And Lipeng dominated him as well with the grappling. So I would really caution everyone against writing off these Chinese fighters from Tough China. They look vastly improved on the Macau card, the two finalists there, Sai and Lipeng. And I think they're just hungrier than a lot of these American or these other fighters from other parts of the world. They fight very hard. They're very scrappy, and Lipeng now has 2 wins in the UFC. Definitely not against credible competition, but I wouldn't write him off. Now for this fight, I'm gonna throw all that out the window. I think Chris Wade just looks like a cut above Lipeng. He had a very impressive submission win, first round submission win in his debut fight against Kane Carrizosa. Finished him off with a arm-in modified guillotine choke. Seemed to have a deadly grip. It was very impressive. And Lipeng, as scrappy as he is, he just doesn't seem that technical with his takedowns, or doesn't really threaten with submissions on the ground. I think he was working a rear naked choke against O'Reilly, but if he tries to initiate the takedown game and grappling game here, I think he's going to leave his neck out, and Wade's just going to latch on to a submission. So I think Lipeng's getting subbed here. I really like Chris Wade's debut performance, so I'm taking Wade. Next up at welterweight, John Howard versus Lorenz Larkin. This to me is another kind of coin toss fight. I think it's very close. Both guys are very inconsistent. John Howard, since returning to the UFC, he had that awful fight against Uriah Hall. Very uneventful, but he did get the win there. Then had, I thought, an okay performance against CR Bahadurzada. Showed off some wrestling and some ground and pound. And then against Ryan LaFleur, who a lot of people respect as a rising prospect, was able to compete well with him. I thought was winning on the feet, had LaFleur hurt at some points on the feet. Got taken down a lot, but was able to get some reversals and get back to his feet. But then in his last fight against Brian Ebersol, just did not look impressive at all. Completely flustered on the feet by Ebersol, who before that had a really bad showing against Rick Story. Completely stifled on the feet, couldn't get anything going, couldn't initiate any wrestling game. So I thought that was very unimpressive. And then Lorenz Larkin, another guy who's been very inconsistent. I do think he's the better athlete here. He has a decent striking game. He just doesn't throw a high enough volume to really put guys in trouble or to put them away. I thought he won his fight against Francis Carmont. He has good footwork, bobs up and down on the feet and is able to get in and out of range, get in, land a big strike, get out. We saw that against Kamosi. Hits hard, really busted up Kamosi, but hasn't really shown knockout power yet. Then against Costas Philippou, or actually before that, he lost to Brad Tavares. Wasn't really able to turn up the heat, and you saw that his really kind of methodical, low volume striking game just wasn't enough against another good kickboxer. And then against Costas Philippou, Philippou knocked him out in the first round. Larkin just couldn't make any adjustments. Philippou came right at him, got in his face, and Larkin just kind of stood there and ate his punches. And then in his last fight against Derek Brunson, was doing well on the feet, seemed to have Brunson frustrated on the feet, was winning there, but once Brunson was able to secure the takedowns, he just couldn't do anything about it, couldn't get back up to his feet, and really couldn't dictate the action on the feet anymore once he was worried about Brunson's takedown. So both these guys, I think, are very inconsistent. But I'll go with Larkin. I think on the feet, he just has a more effective striking game. He's more technical, good footwork and good movement. But if Howard can get some takedowns here, or if he can get in Larkin's face, put him on his heels, it could go either way. But I'll take Larkin to win a decision here. Next up at welterweight, Cathal Pendred versus Sean Spencer. Cathal Pendred, I think this guy is just a terrible fighter, one of the worst in the UFC, and I know other people share that sentiment as well, because a lot of people are saying this should be CM Punk's first opponent. But contestant from Tough 19 didn't impress at all on the show. Just looked like a purely wall and stall, clinch fighter, a very boring, grind out style of fighting. In the house, fought Hector Urbina, was able to get some takedowns, but it was a real ugly fight. Just tries to use his size to push people back towards the fence, get a takedown from there if he can, but his takedown game doesn't even seem that strong. And then against Eddie Gordon, tried to do the same thing, just run him back into the fence. There was a very low volume of strikes. His striking game almost seems to be completely non-existent. But in the UFC, against fellow contestant Mike King, nearly got finished, knocked out in the first round. King, I think, just fought unintelligently. If that had been a more seasoned fighter, I think Pendred would have been out of there, but was able to recover, and then Mike King was just completely gassed. Pendred was able to take him down and choke him unconscious. And then in his next fight against Ghassan Umalatov, I thought Umalatov got robbed in that fight. I totally thought he won. Pendred just on the feet comes forward, but doesn't, like I said, throws a very low volume of strikes, throws some leg kicks here, tries to throw a big punch, here and there. But Umalatov was able to drop him at one point, nearly knocked him out. And Pendred he's very plodding and slow. I don't think he has the game to beat Sean Spencer. Spencer is a guy I wrote off after his debut fight against Drew Dober. Won that fight handily, but I thought he looked very unimpressive in doing that. He was able to land whatever he wanted on Dober, but couldn't seem to do anything to get the finish. But in his next fights against Alex Garcia, he got dropped himself in that fight, but was also able to drop Garcia, showed off some power, but lost the wrestling battle there, got taken down. And then against Paulo Thiago right out of the gate, blitzed Thiago, was able to drop him, and then won the fight in convincing fashion, won against the fence in the clinch, and was just able to outstrike Paulo Thiago for that fight. I really don't see Pendred having an effective enough striking game here against Spencer. Spencer's striking still looks really stiff and unpolished, but it is effective, and he's shown he does have some power. Pendred being dropped by Umalatov and Mike King. I wouldn't be surprised if Spencer's able to get the finish here. Only thing I worry about is Pendred's size. Spencer has struggled with the wrestling against Alex Garcia, but Pendred certainly isn't, he isn't a solid wrestler or anything. He just likes to drive guys into the fence, use that size, wear him down, and get him down from there. So I'm going to take Spencer to win this fight. I feel pretty confident in that. This is one, I believe Pendred is a big favorite. This is one where, I think this is a really good bet on the underdog, Sean Spencer. Moving on to the main card, Fox Sports 1, at lightweight, Norman Parke versus Gleison Tibau. Norman Parke, another one of these guys that everyone seems to be really high on, and I'm just, I don't see it at all. Winner of Tough Smashes beat Colin Fletcher to win that. And since then, in the UFC, he's been undefeated. Has had some decent performances, really beat up John Tuck, outstruck him. But that was another fight, like I just mentioned, with Sean Spencer. He was just dominating John Tuck on the feet, but couldn't do anything to really get the finish. Throws very basic 1-2 combinations, doesn't really mix it up beyond that. Had a win over Kazuki Tokadome in a pretty uneventful, close fight. Not technical on the feet, but makes it work with pace and aggression. Another guy like Pendred, who just loves to come forward, has a good gas tank and motor, likes to push you against the fence when on position there. His fight, he had to draw against Leonardo Santos. That was another pretty uneventful fight. He just doesn't really seem to be able to affect change much in his fight. Can't really hurt guys or do anything to put him away. Did finish Naoki Kotani in his last fight, but I think Kotani, just looked like a very unskilled fighter and just kind of laid down to Parke. With Parke's game being really predicated on pace and aggression and pushing guys against the fence, stuff like that. That's Tibau's world, and I just don't see Parke being able to beat him at those things at this stage of his career. Tibau, a real seasoned veteran, has had some setbacks to Michael Johnson and Evan Dunham in the last couple of years. Always seems to give the third round away, which could be a problem here. If he fades hard in the third round, I could see Parke having the deeper gas tank and pushing the pace to where he could get a finish possibly in the third round. But for those first two rounds, if Parke tries to win in the clinch, against the fence, areas like that, I see Tibau just having the better wrestling and grappling all day. I think he's stronger. I think he will win against the fence in all of those areas, and definitely has a more dangerous striking game, and throws a very low volume of strikes, but throws a lot of big haymakers, and I can see him hurting Parke. So I really like Tibau to win this fight, but watch out for that third round. He could fade hard, and Parke could come on strong. Next up, in middleweight, Uriah Hall versus Lewis Taylor. Lewis Taylor stepping in on short notice for Costas Philippou. I would have taken Philippou to beat Hall, but Lewis Taylor, I don't know anything about him. I looked over his record. I didn't see any names that I recognize. Had a win over Brian Houston, recent UFC washout, but I won't pretend to be able to give you any analysis there. Uriah Hall, though, I think it's safe to say he should win this. I mean, if he doesn't, that's just disastrous. A real head case fighter, but I think he's slowly been starting to put that together to kind of shore up those mental deficiencies. Lost the fight to Kelvin Gastelum in the finale. In his next fight against John Howard, had a very uneventful fight. Just didn't seem to have a winner's mentality. Wasn't intent on getting the finish. But then against Lipeng, did explode at the end of that first round. Poured it on Lipeng and finished him, or made Lipeng give up in between rounds there. And then his last fight against Thiago Santos, who was coming off of a really impressive finish against Hani Marks. Really thoroughly outstruck Santos. Came forward a lot, had moments where he was really turning up the heat and pouring on his combinations on Santos. But again, didn't really seem intent on getting that finish. I don't think he had Santos in any real trouble throughout the fight, but won in pretty convincing fashion. So I think he's starting to put it together. And facing a newcomer, Taylor, who's 35, I think it's safe to say Hall should win, even though I don't know anything about Taylor. But I don't know if he has another mental lapse in this fight. I could see him losing a boring decision, but or losing a fight that he shouldn't lose. But I'd say Uriah Hall should be a safe bet. Now the co-main event, really looking forward to this. Although, like I said, the 15-day turnaround for Cerrone, I think, is really going to hurt him. I would pick Henderson to win anyway, but if Cerrone had a full training camp, I would say it's a pretty even fight. I mean, Cerrone's made some big strides in his game since the last time he fought Ben Henderson. And Ben Henderson, he's faltered, he's faltered in recent fights. Lost to the champion Anthony Pettis, and then in his last fight, rebounded with a great performance against Rustam Khabilov, which I thought was one of the best performances of his career. That's the Ben Henderson I think we were all waiting for. Fought very aggressively and was able to get the finish there. But then his next fight against Rafael dos Anjos, who has become one of the elite contenders and is fighting for the belt later this year. Got dropped in the first round, a bit of an early stoppage, but I thought he wasn't coming back from that and got legitimately knocked out by Rafael dos Anjos. Really kind of bizarre. Henderson's a guy we've rarely ever seen hurt or dropped. I think Edgar tagged him a few times, but to lose that way in the first round, especially coming off such a strong performance, I thought that was really kind of bizarre, and I think the game just might be catching up to him a bit. With guys like Dos Anjos, being able to surpass him. But, on the feet, Henderson, another really high-paced fighter. His striking looked great against Nate Diaz, was able to drop him several times. But then against Josh Thompson, he just doesn't seem to be able to really get into a rhythm on the feet, just uses, very low power strikes just to close the distance and press guys up against the fence, work for the takedown. Cerrone can be of a bit of a slow starter. At times we saw that in the Gallard fight. Even in this last fight against Miles Jury, got taken down immediately off of the first kick he threw, but was ready for it with the jiu-jitsu. With Henderson being submitted by Anthony Pettis and Cerrone, in the first fight proved that he does have a dangerous guard, can threaten with that. I would watch out for that if Henderson takes him down, gets on top. I think Cerrone could, have something waiting for him with his dangerous guard. But I really see Henderson just winning on position here. I think he can drive Cerrone back into the fence, just kind of hold him there like he did to Thompson. Work for the takedown, win on takedowns. I think Henderson's just the better athlete, has a little bit more of the complete game. Cerrone's not a bad wrestler by any means, but I'd certainly say Henderson is the better wrestler of the two. But on the feet, Cerrone's really made that range striking game work for him very well. Against Eddie Alvarez, I was really impressed that he was able to win the decision there. Before he was just finishing guys. We'd seen him in trouble in fights and just able to land a fight-ending strike. But against Alvarez, really put together 3 rounds of solid striking where he was able to very effectively keep Alvarez at bay. Those front kicks he used and those knees, very effective, hurt Jim Miller that way and was able to finish him off with a head kick. So if this fight takes place in the middle of the cage, where Cerrone has a lot of open space to work with and can really use those kicks well, I can really see him. I wouldn't be surprised if he catches Henderson But I just think Henderson's going to be able to push him against the fence. And also keep in mind, Donald Cerrone, for as impressive as he's been, he hasn't had to face a wrestler since the last time he fought Ben Henderson, which was very long ago. Fought Ben Henderson last in 2010, and since then, really, maybe Charles Oliveira, the best grappler he's had to fight since then. But at that point, anyway, Oliveira wasn't as good a wrestler as he is now. And just looking at his record, you can see that he hasn't fought a solid wrestler. All these guys have been kind of really good matchups for him. They've all stood in front of him and traded. Henderson, I don't see him doing that. I really think he's going to look to implement that clinch and takedown game. So I'm going to take Henderson here to win a decision. But and also, Cerrone, the turnaround and coming off such an active year. This kind of reminds me of Faber last year when he took on Barao on, I think it was 4 weeks' notice or something like that. And it just didn't work out for him at all. And he had a very impressive, he was coming off of a very impressive win against Michael McDonald in a very active year. And if you remember back to when Cerrone fought Nate Diaz in 2011, was the same kind of situation. I think that was his 5th fight that year. And Greg Jackson had said after he lost that fight, he said that fighting 5 times in a year was just too much, and he thought that really played a role in Cerrone losing that fight. So I think that's a big thing to keep in mind here. He's just fought a lot. I think this is his 6th fight since last January. 5th fight maybe. 6th fight going back to the Dunham fight last November. But, that's a lot. And just coming off of a 3-round fight, I think Cerrone could really be depleted here. Not have the proper cardio to take on a cardio machine like Ben Henderson. And then the main event, featherweight fight, Conor McGregor taking on Dennis Siver. I think McGregor's just going to absolutely tear through Siver. I think it's going to look just like his other fights against Brandao and Poirier. He's just going to have a really big advantage with his speed, with that unorthodox footwork and movement. McGregor, I think he's very impressive. Of course, we haven't seen him against a high-level wrestler like Mendez or Edgar, who I think could give him a lot of problems. But I won't deny that the guy is, extremely talented. I don't agree with him getting the shot against Aldo if he beats Siver. I think Edgar deserved that with his win over Swanson. But McGregor is very good, and I'm really excited to see him fight Aldo. But this is just a complete mismatch to me. Dana White saying that McGregor has to take Siver seriously, and because Siver's always a game dangerous opponent. Siver's not dangerous, guys. He hasn't finished a fight since 2010. 2010, over 5 years ago, was his last finish, and it was against Andre Winner, of all people, a guy who very quickly washed out of the UFC, coming over from Tough. So Dennis Siver, obviously a very talented kickboxer, has those spinning back kicks, a solid striker, can really beat up on guys who don't belong in the UFC. I mean, this guy's ranked in the top 10, but since coming down to featherweight, his only win, 2 of his 3 wins have been against guys who aren't in the UFC anymore. Diego Nunes, couldn't finish him. Nam Phan, very dominant win, but couldn't finish him. One against Manny Gamburian, but that fight wasn't all that dominant. And then his last fight against Charles Rosa, this guy came in, the week of the fight, and Siver did have an arm triangle choke at one point, almost put him away, but struggled with him, got reversed a few times on the ground, and not being able to put away these newcomers and these low-level fighters like Nunes and Nam Phan. I think that's really concerning. Looked great early against Cub Swanson. I was very surprised at how good he looked in that fight. Was winning on the feet. Swanson couldn't find his rhythm, took him down, looked real strong on top. But then as the fight went on, just completely wilted and fell apart as Swanson turned up the pressure, was able to get the finish there. So, I'm not trying to say Siver's a bad fighter. I do think he's probably a top 10 fighter. I haven't looked at those rankings too closely. But to try to make the argument that he's dangerous, it just doesn't hold up. Come on, he couldn't finish Diego Nunes, and he hasn't finished anyone in over 5 years. He's not gonna finish McGregor. It would be a complete miracle if he was able to catch McGregor and land a lucky punch and win this fight. I will say he might be the best striker McGregor has fought in the UFC, from a technical and from a maybe a lethal perspective. Poirier, I think, was a pretty good test for McGregor, though, on the feet. Poirier certainly doesn't have the diverse kickboxing game that Siver does, but Poirier had won some fights on the feet, had shown off some power against Eric Koch. But Siver, I think, is just going to have a big speed disadvantage here, and he's pretty hittable. Cub Swanson was able to just swarm him and land whatever he wanted there, use movement to do that, which McGregor obviously has. And then Donald Cerrone was able to hurt Dennis Siver pretty easily in their fight. Even Matt Wyman, another thing, Siver always fights down to the level of his competition. Like I was saying, couldn't finish Diego Nunes. Manny Gamburin, a pretty even fight. The Nam Fan fight is, I think, the only fight where he really dominated the guy, but still couldn't get the finish. But in the Matt Wyman fight, that fight was extremely close. It was a lot of people thought Wyman could have won that fight, but Wyman was able to get a lot of punches in on Siver, make it a dogfight. And McGregor, with his real slick movement, I think is just going to be way too technical and fast for Siver. I see him getting the early first-round knockout. So those are my predictions for UFC Fight Night 59, McGregor versus Siver. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. Please like the video, comment, and subscribe. Challenge me on any of my picks. I'll be back next week with my predictions for the Fox card, Gustafsson versus Rumble Johnson. And then the following week, I'll have my predictions for the pay-per-view at the end of the month, UFC 183, Silva versus Diaz. Take care, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye.